Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Little. I'm here today with the 95th episode of Weekly Poker Hand. And today's hand is from a $1,500 buy-in World Series of Poker event I played last year. We have Ace-9 offsuit in middle position, actually the low jack seat. And I decided to raise to 1,200, 250, 500 out of my 22,000 chip stack. And then a loose aggressive kid on the button makes it 3,100. And I think folding is a perfectly fine default play. You certainly do not want to be calling out of position with a hand like Ace-9 because you're going to be extremely dominated. However, if your opponent is a very loose aggressive kid, I think this is a great hand to get out of line with and 4-bet as a bluff. If you're watching this video on YouTube or jonathanlittlepoker.com, you can see I'm typing in the hands that I would typically 4-bet with for value. That's going to be pocket jacks or better, and ace queen and better, ace queen and ace king. And if that's your value range, this sort of implies I'm calling with hands like ace 10 suited, ace jack suited, king queen suited, king jack suited, queen jack suited, jack 10 suited, then maybe king queen and ace jack, and then something like 10s, 9s, 8s, 7s, 6s, something like that. That's going to be my calling range. You want to look at the hands at the cusp of that range and consider turning them into bluffs. So good candidates to bluff, let's just highlight them in, are going to be hands like ace-9 suited and worse, because those are also not quite good enough to call with. Ace-10 offsuit and worse, because again, these are not good enough to call with. And then perhaps hands like king, jack, king, queen, and then some of the suited connectors that are not quite good enough to call with. That's going to be hands like king-9 suited, queen-9 suited, jack-9 suited, jack 8 suited, 10 8 suited, 10 7 suited, 10 9 suited, then maybe something like 8 6 suited. So these are the potential hands that you can bluff with. If you notice, this is 19% of hands, which is a lot of hands. Let's go back and look at the initial value range. The initial value range is only 4% of hands. So in general, you typically want to be roughly half value and half bluff if you think your opponent's going to fold a little bit too much, which will usually be the case. So I like mixing in some of the better aces, some of the better ace X, like ace 10 and ace jack. I like putting in king jack. I like putting in queen jack, and I like putting in king 10. Notice this immediately already has us up at 9%. So this is a little bit too many hands to 3-bet with as a bluff right off the bat. So to fix this, you can 3-bet for value a little bit more. You could perhaps 3-bet ace jack suited and pocket 10s. Now we're up at 5% of hands. And then you can perhaps 3-bet these 4 hands right here: queen jack, king jack, ace 10, and ace 9. And then maybe throw in some of the ace X suiteds, however you decide to play them. Maybe all of them if you feel like it. And now notice we're at 11% of hands. So we have roughly 55% value, something like that, and 45% nuts. And so I think this is a pretty reasonable strategy against most aggressive players. I tend to fold the hands like 8-6 suited and 10-7 suited. I don't think you need to be 4-betting those. But you can do whatever you want within reason. Especially in live poker, you can go off of your reads. Like if you get the vibe that this loose aggressive kid just has a good hand, feel free to ditch a lot of the bluffs. But if you think that he may be messing around, you need to get out of line. So now the question becomes, what should we do with this ace-9 offsuit, assuming we want to 4-bet it? We could go all in. If you've studied my work, you know that I'm fine pushing for roughly 7 times what your opponent makes it or less. Notice here, 7 times 3,000 is roughly 21,000, and that's right around what we have. So shoving is a possibility. The problem is that when you get called with this ace-9 offsuit, you are just so dead. So I'm not a big fan of shoving here. Instead, I think a much better play is to 4-bet small. And a lot of people get in their minds that if you 4-bet, it must be big to try to make your opponents fold. But you'll find that if your opponent just has stone nothing, like say he's sitting here with ace-2 offsuit, he's just going to fold. Or if he has king-5 suited, he's going to fold. And when he does call, he's frequently going to fold on the flop. So if you do 4-bet here, I think you can make it very small, something like 6,000. So he made it 3,100. We're making it 2,900 on top. And a lot of players would just never do that because they're like, oh my God, I'm going to get called. But you have to realize, you're going to do this you're going to make this exact same play with all of your nut hands too. So whenever you have a nut hand, you're just roping your opponent in and getting more value. So this is a fantastic play to make against people who you think are 3-betting you with more than just nut hands. So I do make it 6,000, and he calls. Not shocking. Flop comes king 6-4. Not a great flop for my hand, but really, none of the flops are going to be great for your hand when you have ace-9 offsuit. And I bet 4,500 into the Well, it's not showing it, but it is roughly a 13,000 chip pot. As on the flop, you don't really need to bet too large. If your opponent has a king, he's never going to fold. And if he has worse than a king, he's going to fold a huge portion of the time. So if I do bet 4,500 and my opponent calls, I'm usually going to be done with a hand unless I get the vibe that he's calling with something like pocket sevens and will then fold to a turn shove. So that's really the only time I would consider shoving on the turn. So this is a play that I think you should definitely add into your arsenal. Let's see what happens this time. This time the opponent does just fold. And the play really works well when you're in position, but out of position it can also work great. The reason it's a little bit better to do in position is because your opponent will be out of position, and it's much more difficult to play out of position than in position. So keep that in mind. This is a really good play to do, like, say you raise button and then loose aggressive small blind raises. It's a great spot to get after it. Here's a little bit dicier because we are from low jack seat and we are against someone who, you know, a player on the button. Of course, the players on the button typically get after it. So all in all, this is a fine spot to go for it. And if you never make this play, I can guarantee you are leaving money on the table. So make sure when you are 4-betting, it's not only with the absolute best hands. This is something that, gosh, probably half of the students who come to me initially, this is something that they have a problem with. And this is a relatively easy problem to fix. You just have to have a little bit of courage and be willing to get out of line. In my new interactive poker coaching program at pokercoaching.com, we actually discuss things like this on a regular basis. We try to figure out ways to make you play better. I want to take the amateur players who come to me for help. I want to take them out of their comfort zone and make them think about how to exploit their opponents instead of being the ones who just play, you know, good, tight, aggressive poker. There's nothing wrong with playing good, tight, aggressive poker when you're playing against really bad opponents. But as you move up, as you start getting to the middle and high stakes, you must fight hard for pots. And this is an example of that. So if you're never 4-betting in this spot with ace-9 offsuit or any of the other bluffy hands, definitely check it out. You can go there, see everything the site has to offer at pokercoaching.com. So thank you very much for being here with me for this 95th episode of Weekly Poker Hand. I will talk to you next time.